I know that Senator John Liu and you just secured $20 million. Yes. So how did you secure that, and how do you plan to spend it?
So we already have a plan. This was a plan that was made up by our community members, by the organizations that serve us on the community level, and are based off of the needs that we've been seeing throughout the city and the state. And so we have we had an ask of actually $64.5 million, but we got $20 million, which is the most that we've ever gotten for the Asian American community. I want to remind folks that this is actually money that's owed to us. This isn't money that that's like some kind of give, right? Because so I'm just going to give a little bit of history, if that's okay. But when I first became the assembly member representing Manhattan's Chinatown, we doubled the amount of Asian Americans representing our state, and so that means that we had two Asian American legislators. It was Assemblymember Ron Kim and myself, and we were both on the assembly side, and we didn't have any senators, and it was really the first time that we had the ability to even ask for an Asian Pacific American task force. And so our speaker, after I was elected, helped to form the first Asian Pacific American task force. And this is a task force that is actually focused on issues for our communities, the issues that our communities care about. And that was the first time that we ever had any kind of policy body to be able to think about these issues. As I was looking through different things, trying to figure out what we can do for our communities, and looking at all of the different historical things that have made it so that we've been left out, and I realized that we've been completely left out of our state's budget. And yes, there were a couple of times when some dollars would come in through member items or program dollars or capital dollar projects that were just a one-time give, but we were never a line item. We were never a priority for our state. Our budgets really show what our values are, and it was never a priority item for us to care about our Asian American communities. And so the first time, it was a $174 billion budget. I still very, very clearly remember. And I was finally able to get $300,000 for our community organizations, and then we were able to get a little bit more, so $600,000, and then finally last year we were able to get $10 million for the very first time ever, and then now we were able to secure $20 million. So with a lot more representation, with John Liu in office, Kevin Thomas in office, Jeremy Cooney in office, with Zoran Mamdani as my now co-chair of the APA task force, with new Asian American representation in our body. This is why it's so important to have representation. This is why it's so important to have that diversity, because with that lens and with the voices, we were able to secure these dollars, and we were able to make sure that our Asian American communities are able to have the representation it deserves. Ron and I started the fight, but it takes a lot more than two people to be able to get to the result that we need.
Of course, it's a good thing. I mean, for the Asian American community, it's a good thing to have representatives. It's good to have funding coming in. But I mean, putting that in the context that we're in New York, with so many Asian American population.
This city has 18%. Yeah. 18%. And we are the largest growing ethnic and minority group. We're also the largest growing undocumented group. And yet we have the least amount of social services, the least amount of benefits, the least amount of funding.
I mean, why is it like that?
It's historic, really. And I think that we can really kind of look at, a lot of the anti-Asian sentiment, a lot of the things that are happening right now as tied in as well, right? People want us to have like a single fix or like some kind of magic potion or bullet to fix the big issues, but people forget that the history of us being here in this country also was started with hatred and neglect and alienation. I mean, I think that this is where, we have to really put ourselves into a timeline and see how far we have come very quickly in actuality, even though, it might seem like it's been forever. But I think that, when we're looking at how we are dismantling some of those very historic pieces of what makes up our country. Like, this is why studying Asian American history is so important. This is why we have to have Asian American history in our textbooks. This is a bill that we need to pass. This is something that we need to talk about, because this history is so important, because this is how we indicate how we've belonged here and how we've been here and how we actually deserve, to have the benefits and the actual, country include us in everything, because we're written out. And there's two stereotypes that we all know about, right? The perpetual foreigner syndrome, right? And the model minority myth. And both of these stereotypes result in the same thing. And people don't realize that neither of these things are good. They're all bad. And it's always to deprive us, right, of representation, of resources. So the model minority myth, they're saying, well, you're doing great, so you don't need anything from us. We don't need to give you anything. Result, we don't give you anything. Perpetual foreigner syndrome. You don't belong here. You're not one of us. And so therefore, we don't need to give you anything. Result, we don't need to give you anything. So time after time after time, the stereotypes make it so that we don't have resources. And so that's why we're not in the budget. That's why we don't have any resources. That's why people don't care about whether or not there's language access. This is why it's so important for us to be able to have, these conversations, this dialogue amongst our colleagues.
But are we doing anything? Are Asian Americans doing anything to change this status quo?
I think that we are, by having more representation. We are having more representation, and therefore we are asking for people to understand that things are not all good for us, right? And there is no asking to break that myth. The myth is unreal. It's not real. It's a myth. And so the fact is this: 1 in 4 Asian Americans here in New York lives in poverty. We are the most impoverished ethnic group in the entire state and in the entire city. And I think that it's really, clear that we're not doing well. So when you have people aggregating that data and saying we don't have to give you resources, that makes it so that you don't have resources. So what we need is for us to actually have the conversation about what's actually happening. If 1 in 4 Asian Americans is living in poverty, that's not making it, right?
For your current district, I think 40% of them are Asian Americans. And what are some most pressing issues for them?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the biggest issues here is housing. I mean, housing is very difficult. It's expensive. 1/3 of my district is also public housing. A lot of Asian Americans actually live in public housing and in, NYCHA, right? And so when there are, needs for fixes for hot water, heat, any of these basic necessities, it's really difficult for them to fill out a form, tell people that they have these needs, so they call our office. And so there's language barriers, there's lack of access, and it's even without language barriers, it's hard to get, NYCHA and public housing to respond, so I think it's really necessary for us to, know where some of these needs are. So it's housing. The other thing is language access issues. Our office often ends up being the translator for so many different, issues that our constituents face. We do, help them to read their mail. Some people have been defrauded. People have had fraudulent activity happen to them. Right, so we have seen that happen with a lot of our seniors, just in the robocalls alone. The ones that say that we're the Chinese embassy, you have a package waiting for you. And because it's in Chinese, so many of our seniors fall for the scam. And we actually had millions of dollars fleeced from our seniors. they actually stole millions of dollars from people. And so this is why I have a piece of legislation that will, first off, there's one to try to end robocalls. The second one is one that will help to stop and prohibit fraud. So, and fraudulent practices, unfair practices, deceptive practices, and abusive practices. We've seen that happen throughout our small business community. We've seen it happen to many of our seniors, to people with disabilities, and we've seen, people, especially with language access issues, get taken advantage of. So this kind of bill came from all of these complaints that we've had over the past. There was a scam that was going around where you sign a paper and all of a sudden your utility bill is like $1,000 more. And that happened to so many of our constituents here, and I think that it's really important for us to be able to help to make sure that people are not getting defrauded.
And I also want to ask about police reform, and my question comes in two parts. First part is that how's your constituency react to this movement, if you will? And second is that I want to hear your side of the story to that New York Post article.
Oh, that was like so stupid. I can't even, apparently, apparently like a mistaken like is enough to be on the front page of a paper, how many times have you browsed through Instagram and your thumb like presses on a like, and I don't even know like why that was an issue, and that was apparently I am that famous. So I don't know what else to say.
In reality, like how bad is the conflict between the police and the people here in New York?
I think that there is constant conflict between the police and people in New York, and it's gotten and reached a peak that I think is very dangerous, and I think that it's always in this under your skin kind of feeling, So I was actually walking past the M15 bus stop, and I was just walking past, and there were police officers who had pulled these Chinese seniors off of the bus, and so they were confused, and they were given fines and tickets based off of them not paying for the fare. And they didn't know that they had to pay for fare beforehand and that they were actually on an M15 Express. And so there were the little machines that helped you but they're so used to taking the M15 and just scanning in. But the M15 Express makes it so that you have to get a ticket first and then get onto the bus. So they were confused. But even though I explained this to them, so they stopped me and they asked me to translate to them that they were going to get a fine. And, I was like, okay, I will translate it. And so I told them, and they wanted their ID, they wanted their information. And this lady, didn't know how to, give her what she wanted. And she was getting very upset, very agitated. And she was like, I don't know what I did. And, I had to get to my daughter and she's waiting for me, and so they were just very, very agitated about the whole situation. And they started to give them the fines. These fines are humongous, I couldn't believe that they were fining them for a very honest mistake. And I told the officer, I was like, well, I don't think that any of them meant to. And she was just like, Miss, I'm not asking your opinion. And I was like, okay, well, you asked me to translate, but I guess I'm just a translator. She stopped me on the street to have me translate. And then I told her the story, and I was like, they were not meaning to, get onto the wrong bus. They didn't want to be on the wrong bus, obviously, and they were just so used to scanning in once they were paying for their, they have all Metro cards. They just didn't know.
Is there anything you can do in Albany?
So one of the big things that I'm trying to do is to make sure that there's language access services for everyone, right? One of the biggest things that, I think is important for accessing and having language access services is actually the data disaggregation bill that was passed, and we passed it. And it's very, very important for us to actually have services that will provide the language, services for the most, people that we can serve at a time, right? So it's really just making sure that the services are the right languages for the right communities, right?
And as you said in your policies, in your politics, you're open, right? You're the progressive of the progressives.
I am progressive, but I think that, a lot of times it's about listening and understanding where other people are coming from, because I don't think that there's any wrong point of view. I think that it's really about where you're coming from in that point of view.
Does your progressiveness ever become a problem between you and your voters?
It's a very important thing to communicate and to also to listen, because we are all going to have different places where we come from and different reasons why we believe what we do, but there's nothing wrong with believing different things. It's just about understanding why, and then figuring out how to problem solve. And I will say that I don't think that there's anything wrong with delivering resources, making sure that your constituents have the things that they need, and doing all of the work to make sure that people are having an advocate, a great advocate to fight for their housing, the tickets on their small business, the times when they need to have somebody advocate for them at the Department of Health, or to help them with their unemployment insurance or their SNAP benefits, and that kind of work on the ground is the one that is the most necessary, the constituent work and all of those things, and then believing that we want the same things is the most important thing.
Who inspired you to get into politics in the first place?
I've had amazing mentors like Sharon Tomiko Santos in Washington State. She's a fantastic leader and somebody who I looked up to for a lot of my political career, because I believed that it could happen, that a woman could actually be a state rep, right? That an Asian woman could actually be elected. And I got to see Gary Locke be elected as governor. I thought that was really amazing. They have that whole saying, if you can see it, you can be it. I'm just lucky to have a lot of amazing examples of what is a good leader. And I think that, my mentors, like I was saying, were very wonderful in helping me to kind of shape my worldview. And I think that it's really important for us to be able to have, that pipeline of helping more people to be able to have, the eagerness to participate in government. I think it's important for us to have, civic engagement in our communities. I think that, one of the things that I saw was a lack of representation. And, my hope and my goal is still to become obsolete, actually, and to one day not be the person to have to break these ceilings and to, not have to be in office. I'm wanting that, actually. And I think that, my goal is to break that myth of how government is inaccessible and these things just happen to us. Or I want people to understand that there is no big secret to accessing government, that we can make it happen if we want to.